All right. I'd like to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Oscar Boschelli. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at JEC Chicago, and I just want to thank everyone for coming here, especially the Yale panelists who are coming to share a little bit more about their alma mater. And just to provide some context about JEC Chicago for our panelists and those who might be non-members visiting, we're a nonprofit established in 2014, and we introduced high schoolers around Chicago to the fields of business through events such as this. And that's obviously a bit more difficult given our circumstances, but we're working hard. And if anyone who is a non-member is interested, you can learn more at the junioreconomicchicago.org. With all that being said, I think it's time we get to know each of our panelists. First off, we have Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Sue, Yale College graduate, class of 1997. Thank you again, Oscar, for having me on your panel today. Very honored to share a story about my Yale journey. My journey is bookended by two essays that I still vividly remember even 2 decades later. The first essay got me into Yale. It was for my early action application. I'd written a tongue-in-cheek scientific paper on the biochemistry research I had done at Yale as a high school student. It stated a well-reasoned case for me to continue this lab research, while at the same time, it walked through the formulas of what I would contribute to the college community. That essay got me into Yale, but boy, were those formulas wrong. As with life, things always change. Yale really awakened my curiosity, opening up my perspectives beyond the lab sciences that really consumed my passions in high school. Yale was really life-changing for me. And today, 3 big life lessons still stick with me. The first lesson, Yale taught me the power of broad thinking, which would later help me invest in early stage companies as a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley during the era of MySpace, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Yale also taught me the power of diverse debate, which would later help me scale internet companies to IPO, including Zynga, which went public in 2012. And lastly, Yale taught me the power of paying it forward, which would bring me to Chicago in 2018 and build technology companies with purpose, deploying technology for good. My years at Yale had led me down a different life passion, eventually leading this journey to essay number 2. That essay graduated me from Yale with honors in economics. My research and models had looked into how early internet providers like AOL could price internet traffic congestion. Yes, even back then, the internet would get congested. The data was well applied, though today, as a tech executive, I reflect on how much of that world of dial-up internet has been radically transformed. As with life, things change, but I'll always cherish this Yale education. Thank you for your time. I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Next, we have Adrienne.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. My name is Adrienne Lo, class of 2002, though it feels a lot more recent. Also an economics major. So my path to Yale may be a little different. I grew up in Hong Kong and Canada, so I had actually never set foot on the East Coast of the US until the day I arrived at Yale. Didn't know a whole lot about the Ivy League, but when I did quite well on my SATs, started getting some pamphlets, that's when, we thought maybe it's worth a shot. So, for me, I was actually surprised to get accepted with financial aid. I didn't know anything about New Haven. And so, yeah, I kind of came in it blind. No one from my high school had never ever applied or even gotten to a school like that. So my knowledge was limited. I think the appeal to me was beyond the brand. The for a mid-sized college, just the tremendous resources it offers. Even as freshmen, you can get exposure to the top-notch professors in their fields. And I think it also is very community-oriented. So they really make sure that every undergrad is taken care of. There's a residential college structure. So even though I came not knowing anyone, not knowing much about the culture, like at no point did I feel like I was alone. In terms of my studies there, I think a liberal arts education is great in that you can, for instance, like me major in economics, but only a third of my classes were in economics. For me coming from Canada with student loans, I knew I had to major in something practical, which served me well when I graduated without a work permit as an international student. But I got exposed to, all types of things from history to political science to history of art and music appreciation, just completely broadened my mind. And I think I met a lot of people who were very passionate about different topics and very opinionated. And almost every student I knew, including myself, were involved in community service there. And I think if you look at the number of Yalees who go on to public service, it's really a testament to the culture there that, we're here to make a difference. It's not just about pursuing a career. And that's something that I've taken with me, and I'm very involved in my company outside of my day job, involved in my community. Coming out from Yale, I didn't actually know exactly what I wanted to do. I did some general business research and consulting. I knew that I wasn't interested in finance, even though I got quite a lot of exposure to it through my studies. And so I ended up in a pretty a niche field that's been growing rapidly, the field of people analytics. That's really applying analytics, quantitative measures to the field of HR and human capital to make better decisions about how we attract and retain and recruit and or engage. And it's worked well for me. 10 years ago, there were barely any positions like this. And now every large organization has it. So it's found something that I'm super passionate about. So very lucky. And I think for me, coming from with Yale degree in economics, it just paved the way for me to find my own niche.
Thank you so much, Adrienne.
you.
And then Seth is going to be joining us later, but for now we have Bill.
Okay. Good afternoon. Oscar, you can hear me okay and see me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Oscar, thank you for putting this together. This is a great idea. My name is Bill Adams. I'm the old timer in the group, class of 77. I retired 3 years ago as co-president of Nuveen, before that known as Nuveen Investments. Now we're a division of TIAA, a large asset management firm. I worked there really my whole career and was very fortunate to have the experiences I had there. Excellent firm. I went to Yale coming out of boarding school, where I went to Phillips Academy. I had come to the United States for the first time when I went to Phillips Academy. My family grew up overseas. I was born in Cuba and grew up in Colombia. My mom is from Colombia. And both Andover were, boarding school and Yale were perfect for me because of the diversity of the student body, people from all over the world, different perspectives, different cultures. And Yale was a wonderful experience for me. I wanted to get a liberal arts education, which is exactly what I did. And I got to pursue my study, continue my studies of Spanish, even though I knew the language. The literature was also a very precious part of it. And also just made dear friends, including one of my dearest friends, Master Thompson, who opened my eyes to the world of African art and philosophy and how it manifests itself in the Americas and in a lot of things in the world. And also met my wife of 40 years, class of 78, which I'm very proud of, since at the time the ratio of men to women at Yale was 3-to-1. So I consider myself lucky to have met such a wonderful woman as my wife, Liz. So I look forward to getting into more detail on the questions from your panel.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, I think we're just gonna move into our Q&A session, and feel free when I direct these questions at someone, just feel free to chime in after.
Okay.
With a lot of seniors graduating this year, they're definitely gonna have to grapple between decisions coming up soon. So I was wondering if maybe each of you could provide some insight regarding why you chose Yale, and maybe Paul could kick us off for this one.
Sure. Yeah, I was born and raised in New Haven, and Yale had programs for local public high school students to take classes there. So even before officially enrolling in Yale, I'd been carrying 3 credits to my name, and so it really gave me exposure to how intimate those classes were, how engaged these world-class professors were, the community. Obviously, my parents wanted me to stay close to home. So, I always felt welcomed by Yale. I was always somewhat intimidated by the world-class nature of it, but because of that openness and the family feel, I felt it was a great place to pursue that for that continuing education.
Thanks, Paul. Maybe Adrienne could go next.
Oh, sure. So again, I had very little background on Yale ahead of applying. For me, it was my long shot. So, you never know. I wrote quite passionately in my essays about just the need to have a voice, to be involved in the community, especially coming from an immigrant background. I'd done a lot of campaigning in my youth. Which is probably unusual in Canada, especially, and for someone who came from Asia. And so I think apparently that message appealed to them. I was very surprised and shocked when I got in, and the more I learned about it, the more it sounded appealing. I think the location was a big draw for me. I'd never been to New York. Having access to that type of a city and being in a smaller urban environment that's very manageable, but gives you a lot of opportunity for community service. That's something I'm very passionate about. Whereas a lot of campuses I think are kind of in their own little bubble, and in more rural areas. It helped me to learn about a different slice of America. And just the world-class caliber of the professors. I think not every college, even Ivy League college, gives you the opportunity to be able to connect with, to take seminars from professors of the caliber as a freshman. And there are no limitations at Yale. You can be a freshman and take a seminar from someone who's just absolutely top-notch in their field. And for me, that's a rare opportunity that I just did not take for granted.
Thank you, Adrienne, and then Bill.
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, I did have a very, very long family legacy at Yale. So I'm one of those people that on the US side of my family, literally have ancestors that were at Yale in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s. What I'd say about that is that, as I've studied that, because I've studied the writings and memoirs of many of my ancestors when they were at Yale, or they wrote letters from Yale. And even though life has changed enormously since those days, Yale was still a very special place, and still had kind of at its core all the things that have just been mentioned, which continue to this day. In fact, a number of my ancestors were ministers. They were in the business of trying to help people's spiritual life. But at the time when I applied to Yale from Phillips Academy, liberal education was a hot topic, and I really wanted a liberal education. I wanted to be able to get a balance. I didn't want to become a professional right from the get-go, going to college. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was very interested in science. I was interested in languages. But Yale really provided that broad base of different things that then exposed you to things that you never even knew were out there. And with as others said, some just incredible professors that were very accessible. And that is very, very hard to find anywhere else in the world.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, there definitely seems to be this unparalleled opportunity of a liberal arts education you get at Yale. And for myself, I'm definitely not like interested in just studying one thing. So that's definitely really intriguing to me. Uh, yeah, when our seniors on this call graduate, they're definitely going to have to make this decision soon. So maybe if each of you could provide some insight as to why you chose your major, and maybe Adrienne could kick us off for this one.
Sure. So for me, I'm a very left and right brain person. So I think as a social science, economics taps into both sides of things. Really want to understand how things work, be able to understand when I will read the Wall Street Journal, understand, when I'm watching the news and the president speaking about the economy. For me, I went in thinking I was potentially interested in finance. To be honest, like I said, I came from Canada with student loans, and the exchange rate was really bad, so I felt a lot of pressure to make sure I got a job, and it worked well. I came in where investment banking was really hot. Even history majors, most economic majors were going into banking, and I graduated after 9/11, and all that had actually evaporated. But for me, I realized with an economics degree, like you don't have to just go into finance. It opens a lot of doors across different fields related to business. And so, yeah, it served me well. Like I said, economics is quite broad. So, took some of the classes related to economics of poverty was one that stood out to me, where we try to, I was in this team where we met with a nonprofit in New Haven and try to understand based on the government benefits, like, can you survive? Like, with a family of four, what does that mean for so many families in this country that are living on benefits? One of my team members, actually, her sister was on welfare in Akron, Ohio, and it's like, wow, like it opens my mind to all types of different lifestyles and challenges that people face. And then you have the more hard classes related to econometrics that I apply actually a little bit today in my current field, just the statistical knowledge. So yeah, it was practical, and it helped me to also just be practical. I think I wasn't going to law school like a lot of my peers, for instance. I knew I had to work right away. So yeah, helped me to get a job.
Thanks, Adrienne. And maybe Bill could go next.
Sure. So I chose to major in Spanish because that's what I loved. I just loved taking courses in Spanish. I had grown up in Latin America. I showed up at Yale, and they wanted me to take French. And I said, no, I'm taking Spanish. And I took Spanish literature classes every single semester I was there. And it was basic, I got a lot of grief from my roommates. They said, you're majoring in Spanish, but you already know how to speak Spanish, so you just wanted the easy way out. But I said, hey, there's people that major in English. What's the difference? I was reading novels, I was reading all the great works, and I was learning how to write well and communicate well in Spanish. And so that was invaluable. I would never have had that opportunity anywhere else. I also took tons of economics courses. I could have majored in economics as well. I took science courses. I took courses that things I never even know existed. And all of those were, really brought to bear the whole notion of a liberal education. That's why you go to a place like Yale, because after that, I worked for 3 years, and then I went to business school. And at business school, you can learn all the ins and outs of accounting and finance and so forth and so on. But in college, when you're in college, that's the one opportunity you have to really learn how to think, learn how to write, get exposed to a lot of different topics from top professors. And so that's why I chose my major, just because I loved it.
Thanks, Bill. I definitely share the sentiment about being of Latin American descent. I'm not allowed to take Spanish at my own high school because I'm already fluent, and I have to do the opposite, so I'm taking French right now.
You'll get back to it.
Definitely. Paul?
yeah, like Bill, I had two majors, but I majored in things that I loved. I love writing with numbers and applying them to real world problems. And economics for me was more applied math, linear algebra, statistics. Back then, there wasn't data science as they do now, so it kind of got nestled under economics. And as I mentioned earlier, that's what led me to write about the economics of technology and back then dial-up internet. Applying them to real world problems really intrigued me, especially around organizational behavior. And that I found a lot of classes under the political science department. So it led for a lot of classes, sophomore and junior year, a lot of senior essay research, senior year, but it was a great experience, double majoring at Yale.
Thanks, Paul. Seth, I just saw you join the call not too long ago, and I know you had your business call, so no worries regarding that. But I just, maybe if you could just introduce yourself for our audience.
Sure, happy to do so. Oscar, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So my name is Seth Prostic. I've lived in Chicago for, gosh, I guess 23 years. Grew up in the Kansas City area, went to Yale as an undergrad, not knowing exactly what I wanted to study. I was a history major, and happy to talk about that as appropriate. Also had no idea what I wanted to do after college. And so, the summer internships I took, I mean, I was painting houses one summer. I worked at a think tank one summer. I was sort of all over the map, not as focused as clearly people here on this on this board are. Spent some time working for an investment bank in New York City and in Singapore. Took some time off and moved to Chicago to go to business school at the University of Chicago. Met my wife here and decided to build a career here in Chicago. So I've got two kids who are in high school. One of whom's at a selective enrollment high school. The other's at a private school, and live up near Wrigley Field.
Thanks, Seth. And since you just mentioned talking about your major, do you maybe want to, before we move on to our next question, do you maybe want to elaborate on why you chose history?
Yeah, now when I was in school, which obviously was a long time ago based on my hairline, but when I was in school, history actually was the most popular major. There were about 200 students in my class, my grade, out of 1,300 students that were history majors. I had an outstanding faculty. And I remember taking as I said, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to major in when I went to Yale. I remember taking a Chinese history course and just being fascinated by it and thinking if that, for a white kid from Kansas, if I found that interesting, just imagine what else I'd find interesting within that department. And one of the great things about Yale is just the depth and breadth of liberal arts courses. And so, I would guess there may have been 100 history courses that were taught at Yale when I was there. And so it took, I think, only have to take 12 classes in a major to be, a history major, one of which is a senior thesis. But there are all kinds of people that were history majors in my class, from, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and business people as well.
Thanks, Seth. Yeah, it definitely seems like Yale really focuses on depth versus just the surface level of each of your majors. And I think they seem to be more focused on creating interesting classes as opposed to just content. And I think that's definitely helpful for us to know as high schoolers. You've already talked a bit about them, but could you all maybe provide some insight regarding your favorite classes at Yale? And maybe Paul could kick us off for this one.
Yeah, sure. So some of my favorite classes were seminars where a professor would moderate debates and projects from the students. Yale gives undergrads access to some of the graduate seminars, and I found those seminars, especially those that remixed two different expertise, were just so thought-provoking. Visual display of data was one of my most favorite seminars. You had design people in that class, and you had data quants like me kind of picking up design. Those debates, the ramping up of that learning curve was such a big challenge, and it was one of my favorite experiences at Yale.
Thank you, Paul. Maybe Adrienne could go next for this one.
Yeah, some of the seminars definitely come to mind. I think just, the fact that it's 12 people in the classroom with professor and just the quality of discussion. There were a few seminars that come to mind, like there's one in women's studies where we're talking about some of the issues facing women in society and the workforce, which I thought led to really great discussion, opened my eyes. There was one in my major of economics led by the endowment manager of Yale, and David Swenson, who I'm sure many of those on the panel have heard of, and he's considered the best institutional investor from an endowment perspective in the world. And so being able to learn directly from him and evaluate different companies from an investment perspective was really neat. Even if I decided I didn't really like finance, it was just really intriguing, stimulating class. A really interesting class. I remember I took some random ones like in primate ecology. I love learning about animals, and the professor worked directly with Diane Fossey, who started the gorilla research station in Rwanda. She's very preeminent in her field, and then he kind of took over. That was really neat. History of art, I think, opened my eyes a lot. I went backpacking in Europe after graduation, and it really enhanced my experience as I went from museum to museum.
Thank you, Adrienne. Maybe Bill could elaborate.
Sure. So I had two kinds of classes at Yale that were my favorite classes. I had the classes that were actually classes, and then I had classes that were outside the classroom. And of the classes that were actual classes, obviously a lot of the Spanish classes were always at the top of my list because of my interest there. But then, because I was taking a lot of different things, I'd come across and I know it sounds funny, but I came across this class that I thought was going to be really easy, and it was just called Birds. And it was taught by Sibley, who was a pioneer in understanding the classification of birds. And he was one of the first people in the world that figured out that you could take an egg and use the egg yolk to map the DNA of the birds. And then he could tell which birds were related to each other. And he discovered that ostriches were not related to emus and were not related to rheas in different continents and things like that. And as it turned out, this course was one of the hardest courses in the biology department. And my roommate and I almost barely passed this thing. But by the end of this course, which was a full year course, you had to know every bird in the world to its order, every bird in the United States to its family, and every bird in Connecticut to its species. And the final exam was 3 hours of looking through all these dead birds in the lab and identifying them. And to this day, I carry that with me. It's a great thing. The other great course that I took was called Study of the City, which was did a lot of kind of mock experiments where you would understand the dynamics of how cities are run and the decisions that mayors and economic planners have to make in how they run a city. That was very interesting. And then finally, I'll just say that outside the classroom, as I said, I developed a very strong friendship with Master T, and through his master's teas and conversation and the people he brought to campus, really opened my eyes to the whole world of African art and philosophy and how it manifests itself in everything from music, art, language, and other customs.
Thank you, Bill. Maybe Seth for this question.
Yeah, so I guess a few things that come off the top of my head. One was a master's history class on the French Revolution. Was offered through through a residential college. It was not a residential college I was in, but there couldn't have been but 10 or 12 students in that class. And so the ability to have such an intimate setting with a faculty member, I thought was pretty cool. I remember taking a class by a gentleman who's since passed away, Lee Westerfield, called Spies, basically Spies and Lies. It was a political science class on a little bit about the history of U.S. spies, and up and through, past the Cold War, which I thought was pretty fascinating. He was an accomplished author, in that regard. And then it sounds silly now, but I mean, just to date myself, there was a popular course by Professor Scully on architecture, but I remember being captivated by an American domestic political history class where the faculty member was interspersed. It sounds so obvious now, but it was the only class I had at Yale, I think, where he was interspersing actual readings with actual video footage as part of his lectures, which, the interactive nature, which I'm sure is secondhand to what everybody does today, seemed pretty captivating and interesting to me at the time.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, it definitely seems like a lot of like these courses were outside of your major, and I think that just goes back to what you guys were saying about the liberal arts education and how it forces you to explore new fields.
Seth, I don't know if this was for your class as well, but I had a few friends who took that Spies and Lies class and ended up joining the Foreign Service.
There were definitely a lot of people talking about it after that class.
So in the transition from college to work life, you definitely internships come into play. So maybe could each of you maybe talk about any internships you've done and how you went about acquiring each of those opportunities? And Seth, I know you already talked about the painting, but maybe did you have anything else that existed outside of that?
Yeah, I mean, for the older people on this panel, it's a little bit of apples and oranges. Back when I was in college, back in the good old days, people weren't as focused per se on careers, and so I work for an investment bank now, and so many of the resumes we see, of college students are so focused, and so they have. When I was in college, not as many people did that, or maybe people didn't know what they wanted to do. So, as I said, I painted houses, which I could talk about with respect to an entrepreneurial bent. I worked for a think tank in Washington, D.C. one summer, and it was sort of networking around to try to figure out who I knew or who people that I knew to try to get an in. But I mean, to me, when I think about the preparation for the job, it really was less about internships and more, internships were part of the story about the narrative that you weave about, what you've learned and what you've done and what you've experienced that gives you confidence that you can, do a good job at something. But it's pretty hard to take a data point from 30 years ago and apply that to today's students.
Yeah, we've done more of these college panels, and we've definitely heard that insight about this transition from internships becoming this new thing of the modern era. So that's definitely really interesting to see. Bill, do you maybe share this sentiment, or did you do anything of the sort?
Yeah, I would say a few things. I share Seth's point of view. And when I was at Yale, I actually, I worked as a sailing instructor for kids, teaching like, 80 kids how to sail. We had sailing classes and programs, and I did that. I did get an internship during my business school, and I that's how I got into finance. I just started. I literally walked up and down LaSalle Street with my resume and just knocked on doors and dropped off my resume, and I that's how I got my start at Nuveen. Because a lot of times you don't even know what's out there, and I wasn't real good about the career office and making, doing as well with that. But I would say that internships are valuable if you can get them. They're hard to come by. You need to network, with friends, with the parents of friends, anyone that, it does take a lot of work. And sometimes, you end up with something that is completely different from what you were thinking of starting out at, but that's not a bad thing. So I don't know what to say other than go for it, try it, work hard, network, try to get an internship in an area that you're interested in. They are valuable. There's good experience. When I was at Nuveen, we gave a lot of internships, and we had a formal program around it. And we had a lot of good people, and all those young people got a very good experience in those few months that they were there.
Thank you, Bill. Adrienne and Paul, given that you both have graduated probably more recently, do you have any insight regarding internships?
Yeah, I could jump in. I was work study at Yale, so I worked 20 hours a week, trying to pay off student loans. And I think with the work study, it allowed me to network with a lot of Yale professors doing research for them. That opportunity opened up some opportunities abroad for internships, and it worked really well. Hitting the ground with a letter of recommendation from a senior faculty member at Yale really helped open up doors. Our family wasn't well networked, so it really was imperative for me to really lean into the Yale resources. Yale Career Services was a godsend for me. Some of those letter of recommendations helped me get a internship on Wall Street my junior summer. I had tried some research into tech internships, but back then it was there were probably fewer in between in terms of what organized programs there were. But Wall Street was certainly hiring back then, and Yale Career Services, Yale professors, work study, those three really helped me build up that network that Bill was referencing.
Yeah, I echo that experience. I was on work study as well. I think in my time there, about 20 years ago now, the internship programs are getting a little more established, but through campus recruitment, it was still a limited number, of traditional companies, almost entirely Wall Street, and probably some consulting firms that recruited for this internship. Super competitive. I don't remember competing hard for those internships. I actually got an opportunity on campus that I couldn't turn down. So Robert Schiller is one of the preeminent economics professors there. He received the Nobel Prize maybe 10 years ago. And when I was there, he was already really well known as someone who predicted the burst of the stock market bubble. His book, Irrational Exuberance, was a bestseller, and I was his research assistant the summer before senior year. And that experience alone made my Yale experience worthwhile. It was really shocking to me. I was pinching myself literally, like, how am I meeting one-on-one, weekly, collaborating with this world-class professor, like 20-year-old me from public school in Canada, and literally truly collaborating, editing his book, supplementing it with research. Just gives me goosebumps still. I mean, that was probably the most intellectual experience of my whole life. And, I got it at a young age.
Adrienne, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just as an employer now, I would think, the ability to hear you talk about your experience taking a class from Swenson and, assisting Schiller, irrespective of what your summer internships were, would be fascinating. And, and you would stand out among, a stack of resumes. So I think it's a good point you're making, which is that so much of the experience and what you have to offer somebody is, can go well beyond, what kind of job you had for the course of the summer.
Yeah, and I think you do have to be creative unless you really wanted to work, for the limited number of companies that recruit directly on campus. So, I mean, plenty of opportunities on campus as well. So definitely wanted to
And
emphasize that point. I mean, for me, it was just the summers were tremendous.
so Oscar, can I just add one last thing?
Yeah, of course.
So my oldest daughter and my son went to Yale. My daughter was class of 06 and my son was class of 11. And they both were very successful in getting internships during the summers. And they followed the path that Paul mentioned, which is they got them really through their interaction with their professors, with many of their professors who had projects, side projects going on. So I think that's a good angle to pursue as well.
Thank you so much, Bill. And thank you all regarding your internship. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just adding on to Bill, when we were at Zynga, Yale also had externships where students can come for like 2-3 weeks out to Silicon Valley and check it out with Yale alums. So that was a recent program, probably in the late 2009 or early 2010s. That gave good exposure. And again, it was just digging around, taking that initiative and just talking to people. But we certainly hosted a few externs from that program.
Thank you all. Yeah, as high schoolers, that definitely might not be as relevant now, but yeah, come college, this is definitely going to be something more relevant, especially given a more modern context. I think I'm just going to start moving into the audience Q&A portion just because I don't want to take away time from that. So let me just move there. So audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or just type them in the chat and I can call on you. And also feel free to unmute if you just want to talk right away. Or if the audience just needs a couple minutes to think, I can just go back to the previous questions as well.
I have one.
Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering, so like my father, like he's like worked at like, many different companies and like going to different ones and kind of building up. Like what's your experience and kind of like, I don't know, like the steps you've taken to get to where you are now?
I'd be happy to start with that one.
Go ahead, Adrienne.
So, so I've worked for some very big companies as well. My current company, Grainger, one of the biggest employers in the Chicago area, has about 20,000 employees, over 10 billion revenue, and that's one of the smaller companies I've worked for. So for me, I think the route to getting into a big corporation, if that's what you desire. Previously, I worked in defense and in big pharma. I think a very common path for that a lot of my peers and in business school also took is to go into consulting for a few years, basically, and then transition in at a mid-manager level. So you gain some expertise, and then you can go in at as an expert, and then build up your expertise that way. And a lot of times if you transition to increasingly maybe smaller companies, you can it's probably easier to work up the corporate ladder. In my case, because I work in such a niche area, people analytics, which is emerging, and it doesn't exist in every company, I did have to move around to find a senior leadership position. And so I think it is about being flexible and being open to new opportunities. Not that many people I know coming out of business school stay with an employer for many years and just climb straight the corporate ladder these days, although that the opportunity can exist as well. Especially for some of these companies where they're transforming constantly, especially in the tech sector. The other thing I wanted to know, and I was hoping you'd ask the question on soft skills because it's something that I'm very passionate about. the way I grew up, coming from the immigrant mindset is, focus on technical skills. When I was young, I was kind of pushed into thinking about sciences and being a doctor. And technical skills takes you halfway. It gets your foot in the door, gets you to the middle levels, especially if you're in a big organization and a corporate environment. Soft skills are critical. And that's something I've learned over time. I think Yale helped me to develop some of my soft skills and the extracurriculars and just the very robust dining hall conversations. But navigating politics, I didn't know, how complex it was until I was actually in corporate America. Managing a brand, figuring out who has influence, really just working your stakeholders and doing change management, stuff that you just don't learn in school, and just all very, very critical in advancing in the corporate arena.
Thank you, Adrienne. Bill, Paul, or Seth, do you have any other insight regarding that?
Sure. I'll just mention that I'm a real exception in that I worked at one firm for 36 years. And in this day and age, I think that's very, very rare because there's so much change. Companies are acquired, new companies are coming up, a lot of companies are being disrupted. And so I think in the world that we're in today, it's more likely that people will have many different careers at many different companies, and that change is just going to be all around. And so you have to be able to roll with those punches, to be flexible, to and to always be thinking of the next thing that is what's kind of coming down the pike. Our firm changed, dramatically. It completely changed its business, and that's the only reason why it's still around after 125 years. And I myself had to change my career. I had like 3 or 4 different careers, even though it was at the same firm. So that's just part of the new way that things are.
Yeah, and I guess, Bill, like you, I've worked at a few different places, but I've worked at my last job, my current job for an employer for 19 years, and so I think in this day and age, it's more frequent that people periodically switch organizations. I think it's important just to think about developing mentors at the organization where you do work, so that you're able to get a richer perspective of someone else's who's been at the organization for a while, and can think holistically about what kept that person at the organization or what led that person to make changes. So I think the informal networking is pretty important to help you think through things. But my sense is a lot of organizations are pretty transparent about what's a real career opportunity versus what's a more more of a stepping stone type position where where you're going to max out within a certain period of time.
For me, 2 years out of college, a mentor had suggested a nugget of wisdom that I still carry today. He was saying, be on the right side of change. And with technology in 1998, exploding with Internet 1.0, the obvious change was technology was going to be more and more dominant in our world. So while I've had many jobs, along that 22-year career path, I think that the rising tide of technology has certainly kept me employed and passionate about growing technologies. And I think that there are some easy choices to make about being on the right side of change. And then there are probably micro decisions based on that macro thesis that may take you down different rabbit holes.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Lydia, for your question. Because it seems that no one has questions as of now, I was thinking we could just go back to some of the previous questions. And Adrienne, since you already touched on it, does anyone maybe want to talk about the hard or soft skills that Yale provided you and how that later ended up transferring to your job?
Sure, I'd be happy to start.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I think one of the most important things that I learned at Yale, and which I think is critical for anyone coming out of college, is just learning how to communicate well in both writing and in speaking. Whether it's speaking, one-to-one with someone or speaking in a small group, but writing skills are critical. And it was appalling sometimes when we would be looking. When we were hiring people at Nuveen, I always required everyone to provide writing samples of term papers, of a research project, anything that they had done. And it was appalling to see how people who were going to these top universities, some of them just could not write a paragraph. And I think in this day and age, even though everyone's got laptops and iPads and cell phones, writing and communicating is still a very, very critical, very critical skill. And so I encourage everyone who, to take, even if there are sometimes sometimes you get it just from your history class or your literature class, but or English, but if they offer courses in just writing, creative writing, or just writing in general, that's something I strongly recommend.
Thanks, Bill. Adrienne, Seth, or Paul, any other insights?
Yeah, well, first of all, I completely agree, Bill. I mean, as I think about the skills I learned at Yale, from a hard skill standpoint, the ability to review and synthesize a large amount of information and effectively communicate, principally in writing, but as you go on to if it's sales or really anything, part of it is the ability to convey what you think, why you think so, in a very efficient and confident manner. And certainly, I think the ability to communicate a position succinctly and persuasively in writing is critical, regardless of the type of job you want to have in finance. And I mean, to me, that's the big, as a history major, I mean, I thought that was my biggest advantage. It wasn't I took the only accounting class that Yale offered undergrads when I was there. I didn't do particularly well in it, but I ended up, as an investment banker. So the ability to do that, I think part of it, and what I learned at Yale, maybe it's a softer skill, was really about self-motivation. You're around so many bright, talented people. And obviously the schools you're in too, or in high school, it's a competitive pool. And so just the ability and the need to, really exert energy and effort and discipline and ingenuity to try to keep up with some other talented people is a pretty good trait. And then lastly, and maybe this again gets on the softer side, I think about the appreciation for the talent around you, and not on a competitive basis, am I better than this person, but especially in so many work environments now that are more team-oriented jobs and team-oriented functions within jobs, the ability to get along well with others and to really respect and mesh well with others, are pretty important skills in the business world.
And one more thought I'd add to that, I think, is I would encourage you all to always have that learning mindset that should never end. And I think that becomes especially critical, the rate at which the world is changing with digitalization, big data. A lot of the jobs that will exist in 10, 20 years do not exist today. And a lot of the jobs that exist today will go away. My job, for instance, in people analytics did not exist 10 years ago. And so I think you have to be flexible and just keep on top of the trends, keep ahead of the trends. Right now, no one really understands what, for instance, my company, we're trying to figure out what supply chain looks like in 10 years. And people don't really know. And So, as new technology is getting introduced, companies start piloting, like, be a voracious reader and networker, and just, can be a thought leader in your field. And, with all the, there've been 3 major business cycles and recessions since I've been working, like a lot of my peers, coming from with great degrees have gotten laid off. I got laid off a year after business school. You just have to be resilient and reinvent yourself. And just keep on getting at it. It might be that you have to, go off the track you intended to take. But I think in this world, being flexible is absolutely key. And the other thing I wanted to note is for the ladies on the call, I would love to see more women getting into business. So my MBA program was about a third. I think it's gone up a little bit more. And then a lot of the women actually ended up in, marketing, not a lot in different fields. I think because marketing is thought of as more female friendly, I would say, just the business world is hungry for women. I know my company, every company I work for is just, really wants to support and propel women and into senior leadership. And so there are a lot of different opportunities and jobs in the world of business where, if you're concerned about balance, you can find a balance. For instance, I have a young child, and my job, provides me the opportunity to manage a team, to present directly to the C-suite, and spend plenty of quality time with my family. So, don't let the fact that business is still male dominated, get in your way. There are plenty of opportunities out there that, and individuals and organizations that want you to succeed. Just a side note.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, especially regarding your insight about the male dominant field, and especially regarding the learning mindset. And just, I guess that kind of segues into our last question from me. And this could just be like sort of a quick lightning round, but do you guys maybe want to talk about some of your favorite books? And I'm sure, Bill, you have a lot of insight regarding this.
Well, certainly one of my favorite books was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez in the fiction category, which really was the piece that introduced the concept of magical realism. But more recently, I really love books like Stephen Ambrose's Undaunted Courage. I love fly fishing and going out to Montana and places like that, and to read the story of how these pioneers just went across the country and survived in the wilderness, and they would eat 8 pounds of meat a day, and they were still hungry and very fit. But a great book. I strongly, highly recommend that, as well as the Civil War book by McPherson, which is a great history of the Civil War.
Thank you, Bill. Maybe Adrienne, regarding some of her favorite books.
I'll go real quick. I always encourage, everyone, including myself, to just learn from different perspectives. And one that's really had an impression on me, a book called Hillbilly Elegy. You may have heard of it, by Yale law grad J.D. Vance. And it's his memoir, his journey from growing up poor in rural Appalachia all the way to Yale Law School. And so for, most of us grew up our whole lives in urban areas, like we don't really see the other side of America. And so for me, I love to travel too and just learn about different cultures and perspectives and understands their needs. And, there's so much I need to learn about this country as well. And obviously, like with the election, like there's a big tie-in. And so for me, it was very eye-opening.
I also like reading books from different perspectives too. And based on what Adrienne was saying earlier, I would highly recommend Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. Yeah, it applies not just to tech, but general society as well.
Seth, do you have any other books you recommend on your end?
Sure. So I enjoyed some of the Stephen Ambrose books too, about the Lewis and Clark Exposition and about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. I think it was called Nothing Like It in the World. Devil in the White City was how I got introduced to Eric Larson, and I've probably read I don't know, 4 or 5 other books of his, but Devil in the White City, which I assume some people have heard of, was about the building of the city of Chicago, leading up to the World's Fair, and juxtaposed with a killer on the loose. But there's a book he wrote about, Germany and the evolution of Hitler from the perspective of a family from the American ambassador to Germany, who prior to that had been a University of Chicago history professor, called In the Garden of the Beast was that book. Yeah, so a lot of what I read seems to be, history. Robert Caro had an amazing series of books on the history of LBJ, which has some interesting parallels and differences to the current occupant of the White House. But those are just a few.
Thank you so much, everyone, with your book recommendations. And I think we're just over 5. So with all that being said, I just want to thank all of our panelists for coming here and for taking the time out of their Friday to do this for us, and for all of the attendees for coming, and just for our attendees who are here right now. For our next events, the U.S. Economic Outlook event is actually starting in 27 minutes, and that's with Chief Economist Ellen Zentner. And we also have our renewable energy event, and this is going to be about government regulation and incentives. And I understand we didn't really have a lot of time for the Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please direct me with me, and I'll make sure to connect you with our panelists after this call. Again, thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday.
Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you, everyone.